Let's move on to the deep dive.
Yes. Let's deep dive.
This is going to be interesting.
This is going to be interesting. Today we're going to talk about charter schools, which I'll start with defining as, or at least what charter schools are supposed to be, are public schools that kind of lie outside of public rules. So they don't necessarily have to be they lie outside the public districts. So even though some of the money is taken from the public district to fund the charter school, they aren't represented by the same unions. Kids who otherwise would be going to a specific one of the schools in their public districts will instead apply to a public school and get entered into a lottery if there are more applicants than there are seats available at the school, to see who goes. And these schools have a lot more leeway in how they operate. The teachers are they're known for being more experimental. They oftentimes can have longer school days or school years. And they're extremely controversial. There's rampant argument on both sides, and there are some people who are so strongly in favor of charter schools, and there are people who are staunchly against them. So I would start here with a credo study. So credo is an acronym that I'm forgetting what it stands for.
I have it somewhere on my page too.
Okay. It's
the Center for Research on Education Outcomes.
Okay. Sounds good. It's a Stanford-based organization, and they release a study every few years. Now they've released 3 versions of this. The last one came out in 2019, I believe, or maybe 2020. It was just post-pandemic, about how charter schools perform, really. And in the most recent one, they found that overall, charter schools are effective in producing learning gains for their students. Charter students gained an additional 6 days of learning, which is how they measure it in math, and 16 days in reading is what they found. So that sounds great, obviously, but then you want to know a little bit more about how that works, right? And so do charter schools address inequity? The answer here also seems to be a resounding yes. Charter schools have the greatest effects for Black and Hispanic students who traditionally lag behind their white and Asian peers in math and reading learning outcomes. And I found these really cool charts that show kind of a curve of the scores between white and Black students, specifically who enroll, kind of the curve of how they look before entering a charter school in 6th grade and then after leaving it in 8th grade. And you see this significant difference where the curve for Black students is shifted to the left, and it kind of tails off with more of the area of the curve towards the worst scores, whereas for the white students, it's much more shifted to the right with a much lower tail on the bottom. And then after students leave the charter middle schools, the curves are almost identical, almost completely aligned. The great thing about charter schools is that they overrepresent low income, impoverished, and generally underserved communities. They have more Black students and more Hispanic students as a percentage of their population than the percentage of those ages of children in the U.S. And they produce the greatest gains for those students, which I feel like is a huge deal, super important. One really interesting split that I found, though, and I think this is kind of the foundation of my ideas on urban schools, on charter schools, is that urban schools are much more effective than suburban and rural schools. Mm-hmm. Urban schools, the study found, produce an additional 28 days of math learning and 29 days of reading learning. Whereas suburban schools, 3 days of math, 14 days of reading. That 14 days of reading is still quite good. But rural charter schools produced 10 days fewer of learning than the local public schools. And there doesn't seem to be a ton of research answering this question yet, but the research does keep coming in support of it. I'm not sure why this. I don't know if you have any ideas of why the data comes out that way.
No, I don't know. I think I think urban schools are the most underserved, but surrounded by so much opportunity to do better. Whereas in a rural community, I don't think you necessarily have the good teachers right around the corner that would be able to just go and hop into a charter school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So in an urban area, you can work on that. Now, listen, I have more issues with charter schools than Ben, but I do have to say I am impressed with how they are able to improve test scores. One of my big concerns was, are people going to charter schools already pre-selected or more likely to be children with more active parents in their lives to apply them to the charter school to get them in that university, to get them in that school, to get them into the lottery system and get them in school, into the better school systems. Now, what we've seen with this study specifically, they were controlling for this effect. They were tracking students before entering charter school and then after entering charter school. So it was the same group of students on both ends there. I saw another study which talks about something going on in Katrina in Louisiana after the hurricane, where the whole place was just decimated. And what was built back was all charter schools. So every student in this area in Katrina in Louisiana was going to a charter school.
Yeah.
And all of these students ended up performing better than the students who were there prior. And they went from like bottom of the nation to like near to the top, or at least better than average.
Okay.
So I think that concern for me is a little bit of a wash. I think I'm okay with that. Now,
one other way I'll say that this is controlled for is they have done studies where they only look at students who are entered into the lottery. So they're able to look at students who were able to attend the charter school and perform there versus students whose parents entered them into the lottery to get into the charter school, but they weren't able to go. And in those cases, they still find significantly improved performances for the children that are accepted into the charter schools.
Oh, I see. So they were comparing even the ones who didn't get in.
Exactly.
I see.
So that controls for the family issue.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. So now, why are charter schools so successful?
That's the interesting question.
Now, these are a couple things that I read about hypothesis reasons of why they're so successful. So longer school days. Charter schools are more likely to have longer school days and longer school years.
Yep.
Now this, right away, this makes me feel like the measurement of success in some of the studies done by Credo are a little flawed.
Because they're measuring success by additional days and years. So if you have additional time,
obviously you're going to have more than that. Intensive personal tutoring for students who need it. That's awesome. Less money spent on administration, gyms, cafeterias. More money is spent in the classroom, but I have some concerns with that. Culture of respect for learning and high expectations. That's just general culture stuff. And teachers are paid based off of effectiveness and can be fired. Now, I want to first go into less money being spent on administration, and then we'll get into the juicy one, which is teachers being paid off of effectiveness. But money being spent on administration, gyms, and all that actually differs between charter schools. Not all charter schools have the same administration costs. One of the big differential factors is if the charter school is for profit or if the charter school is a nonprofit. Now, technically, a charter school cannot be for profit because it uses public money, but it is classified as for profit if it uses a lot of for-profit services to run their school.
Oh, okay. That's not where I thought you were going with this.
What did you think?
So have you read about charter management organizations?
Yes. And then they contract out to charter management organizations.
Some of which are for profit, some of which are not.
Yes.
Yes. So that's I have a lot of problem with charter schools too in some instances. And I've seen a lot of evidence supporting the idea that for-profit charter management organizations ruin charter schools.
Yes.
And make it so that they perform very badly for their students.
Yes.
And I think that this is a good idea in a lot of ways, but I honestly think that for-profit charter management organizations should just be banned.
Right. Totally agree.
Yeah.
For-profit charter management organizations absolutely should be banned. Here is one reason why. For-profit charter schools spend more of their operating funds on purchase services than other charter schools. A nonprofit community-based charter school will spend about 27% of all of its resources on contracted services. A for-profit management organization, this is the phrase you just referenced, spends 77% of all of its resources on these contracted services. We also see a reduction in student performance based off of these for-profit schools.
Yep.
It's actually worse. This is interesting to me. A for-profit charter school actually performs worse when it hires its own staff rather than its contract staff. So I don't know. Maybe that's noise because the sample for own staff is pretty small. The sample for own staff in this study here, they're looking at charter schools in Ohio, is only 28, when the for-profit for contract staff is 76. So maybe there's a difference with the sample there that makes the noise too much to really compare fairly.
Okay.
But overall, it's important to bake it in here. For-profit charter schools perform worse than nonprofit schools on English and math, more on math than English. They are actually even worse when it comes to disciplinary reports. They are more likely to have students that are not, keeping up with the. How do I even say this? What do I say here? They're breaking the rules. They're breaking the rules. Right?
Exactly.
They're a bunch of bastards.
Something that I've also found about the profit-based or the profit incentivized management organizations is it seems they are more strict with their students, that they discipline the students more. And there have been reports of some organizations that basically try to bully the students out of the schools or try to bully the parents into withdrawing their kids from the schools.
Oh, like if they don't fit the mold, get them out of here. I get it.
Okay. Or because the initial foundational idea with charter schools is supposed to be like competition, right? The best charter schools will be selected by parents more and more students will go. And so the best methods of teaching will be weeded out. But with profit-based schools, then they are that incentivized to have good results that they're like, we need to get rid of the students that are bringing our results down.
I understand.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Now, the last thing I'll say about this specific like for-profit, non-profit dichotomy here is it also changes based off of like the grades that we're looking at. So I've seen that charter schools are most effective in grades like 4 through 8 as compared to grades 9 through 12.
Really?
I've seen that the charter schools are more effective in that middle school age of learning than compared to the 9th and 12th grade, which I think lines up with the Credo study. I think
actually it's the opposite.
Really?
The Credo study has the gains higher for middle and high school than for elementary school.
Okay, no, sorry. This is middle school and high school.
So the Credo schools, or the Credo report shows that elementary, middle, and high schools have pretty similar outcomes as far as additional days of learning. But the interesting thing is the multi-level schools that it measured, which are like K through 12, think about that, which have all of elementary, middle, and high, they are really bad. They have really bad outcomes, significantly lower outcomes than the public schools.
Wow.
1 additional day of learning and reading, 20 days negative learning in math.
Oh my God.
So I didn't know why that would be the case.
Right.
Like maybe they're underfunded and need to put students in classrooms with a bunch of other kids that are not their ages, so they can't tailor the education as much as they need to, but I am not exactly sure.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
But this is these 4 things, right? So culture of respect, less money spent on admin, intensive tutoring, longer school days. These are the things that charter schools do differently than public.
Yeah.
I'm leaving out the teacher part because that's going to be the most deeper. That's going to be the most deepest part of this conversation, I think.
Yeah.
So those 4 things, I feel like all 4 of those things could be done by a public school. That doesn't necessarily necessitate charter.
I maybe.
Like the big difference in charter to me is the fact that it's not tied to your location. Like I feel like that's the thing that differentiates a charter from a public school most of all.
To me, it's the experimental aspect. To me, I think
Experimental aspect of it.
yes, I think there is something to competition helping some of these charter schools. Like, I think you're right that the other schools could do this, but the teachers at those schools and the administration aren't really incentivized to experiment, to figure out better ways. They're not incentivized to intensively tutor students who are falling behind.
But let me ask you this now. If we're in a situation where charter schools are competing, and they're competing against each other, isn't that more dangerous and more volatile for the students if they're in a charter school that closes down?
So that actually isn't a problem.
Right.
Charter schools do close fairly often.
Right. So now what happens to those students? Do they lose like a months of learning?
They're just going to get transferred back to their public schools, which is a disruptive process.
Right.
But they don't lose time learning, I don't think.
Well, yeah, technically they don't lose time learning.
No.
But to say that they definitely lose time learning.
Yes.
They don't lose it on paper.
No, they lose days of learning as is measured by Credo, for example.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I don't know exactly what those numbers are.
Right. But I feel like that is that's one aspect that I don't like about charter schools at all. The fact like it could close down, uproot a kid's life, all of his friends are gone.
Sure.
That's depressing. I think it does produce negative I definitely would imagine it produces a negative outcome for at least the year that happened.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It feels very much like an economy to me, right?
Yeah.
Where the startups are more likely to fail, but they also innovate in ways that can push their whole industry forward, like to new solutions, to better solutions.
Yes.
Yeah.
But is kids the right place to be doing that experimentation?
Kids are the only place that you can do the experimentation when you're going to be using the methods on kids.
Well, I think the only other way to do it is through research and academia, and then changing your local school through your through your elections to your education board.
But I feel like research and academia can never be as effective. This basically is research and academia.
Well, it's research and academia, except you're playing with kids' lives.
But you can't test this besides on kids. So if you were to do research and academia, you still need to take kids and educate them, in which case you're just doing the same thing.
Yeah, I guess, but I feel like you're using it's not a revamp of the entire school system like charter school seems like it's trying to be. Like charter school seems like it's trying to be an alternative to the entire public school system.
I don't think that's true. I mean, maybe
it's not trying to be an alternative. It's trying to be the way to do things. That's what it's trying to grow into.
Are you saying it's trying? Because it sounds to me like you're saying it's trying to displace other public schools.
It's trying to totally displace public schools.
But what is the difference? Like, what if, because a charter school, there could just be a version of a charter school that's like a normal public school.
So now, then this is when it gets interesting. Public schools are run and operated by their local governments. They're responsible directly to their local governments. Charter schools technically aren't. They have a charter, like their own constitution, that they give to the town, and the town accepts that charter, and then it is bound to follow this charter. But the number of regulations imposed by the town are lower. There aren't like school board elections for parents to be involved in the children's education in a charter school the same way that there is in a public school. So there's less public output and input and outreach there.
Yeah.
So those are some big differences.
So I think that's an area for possible reform, because some of the horror stories of charter schools, like some of the times when the worst things have happened, for example, when there are for-profit CMOs that are in control of their operations, things have happened where, because of the charter, if the CMO is fired, or if it's found to like be treating kids the wrong way, they have been able to retain, like they've been able to get equipment from the school as they're fired. Like they're able to take computers from the school because of the charter and stuff like that. So that's where it's like, the idea is school boards should still have not only insight into and visibility of, but final say on important decisions.
Okay.
Like hiring and firing.
But now it seems like you just invented public schools again.
I don't think so. Because it's the same. It's like an executive and a product team underneath him.
Okay.
The product team is still figuring out different, like they're trying to develop a new product. But instead, I think public schools are more like an executive and a factory, right? They're not figuring out anything new. They're just producing what's already been designed by the innovators.
If you remove the for-profit charter schools,
Mm-hmm.
what is their incentive to innovate?
I don't know.
So,
but I do know that
so
there
if
are
it-
nonprofits
but
that do.
But if that's the case, and they're not relying on a profit motive to innovate, why can't the innovation take place in the public schooling system?
Because the nonprofit can pay the teachers based on how good they are.
Okay, so now let's get into the main juicy part here.
Sure.
So the fifth part here, why charters are suggested to succeed, is teachers are paid based off of effectiveness and can be fired. Now, explain your position on that a little.
Okay. I think it's pretty simple. So anecdotally, you have a bunch of stories about parents who know about some terrible teacher in their school district who has tenure and is already on a pension plan, and it's super hard for them to be gotten rid of, right? No matter how much they complain about them in parent-teacher meetings, or in meetings with the principal, the teacher is just sticking around. With charter schools, you don't have that problem, where you can get rid of teachers who aren't good for the kids, and you can pay teachers more that are actually specifically better for the kids. Whereas in most public schools in the country, the teachers are represented by a teachers union, which sets pretty equivalent terms, not in that all teachers are paid the same, but teachers tend to be paid based on seniority, and they gain additional benefits based on seniority rather than the merit of kind of the results that they produce as teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I think understanding that that's what your compensation is does make it easier and more likely that you will phone it in. It's not to say that there aren't tons of teachers out there that will not phone it in, that care much more about their job being an important part of our society and way to mold the lives of kids and be motivated simply by that. But I think charter schools cover both of those sides.
I think that there could be reforms where teachers get paid based off of get some bonuses based off of kid performance. I think I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen a lot of evidence that unions hate that idea. I know they aren't pushing for it, but I haven't seen evidence that they hate it. I come from a place where I don't think teachers unions are necessarily the problem, and I don't know if they are. I'm not convinced that they're tied to poor outcomes to students. So I've found some studies that have teachers unions associated with higher standardized test scores than non-teachers unions. I've seen one study that says that a 2011 Wisconsin law that restricted union power reduced average test scores on the state standardized tests by approximately 20% of a standard deviation after the unionization efforts were weakened, because a lot of teachers left the state of Wisconsin because they were under threat. I think teachers unions give teachers a better mental stability. The Economic Policy Institute did a study around that and kind of found because the teachers are now more secure and stable, they have less stress, which makes them more focused on the children and less frustrated at the children. I can imagine if my bonus was tied to kids' performance and a kid wasn't giving a shit, I would be so mad at that kid, right? I mean, if my bonus is tied to how well you do and this guy just isn't showing up to class.
I guess. I mean, but another way to say that is I would be so motivated to get that kid's performance to be better.
Yes, and I understand that. But it is definitely fair, and I don't want to totally say that teachers' unions are shown to benefit child outcomes, because I think the Department of Education they had a summary paper, and they even admit, they said the effects of union on student performance is mixed. Students of average ability who attend schools in union districts perform better on standardized tests, whereas low achieving and high achieving students tend to perform worse. So, and they also agree that there is definitely a higher cost to a unionized workforce, a unionized teachers, than not unionized teachers.
Yeah. So this is where I think our core discussion, I don't know if it's a disagreement, but if unions aren't, I haven't seen evidence that makes me confident that unions improve performance. Mm-hmm. There have been, I see mixed results. I've seen some studies that show a slight negative impact of unions. I see a lot of studies that show no impact of unions. But one thing we can agree on for sure is that they cost more.
Yes, they definitely cost more.
Right.
Definitely.
But this turns into then a broader argument about unions, because unions always cost more, right? And we've been pounding the drum for unions in so many other places. So ideologically, I think to me, it's only a problem if the cost going to unions is taking away from what could be the educational gains of the kids. Mm-hmm. And that's where it seems to me like the charter schools may do better at converting the money invested in them into results for the children.
Now that only happens if they are nonprofits, right?
Yes.
If it's a for-profit charter school, that's not going to necessarily be the case.
Correct.
And in a lot of areas, I don't know the whole breakdown, but in Ohio, for-profit charter schools are more common than nonprofit charter schools. Okay. So, there needs to be larger charter school reform until that type of policy could be.
I think generally the majority is nonprofit.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I agree that there needs to be reform, but I think there is something to treating, I don't know, this is going to sound so conservative, but that's okay. treating education more like a business. There's something to allowing for competition. And a lot of the examples, the anecdotes that I've read about how charter schools operate is not like it's cutthroat. There are some that's there's one school that had a got to go list of 16 students who were making trouble and they wanted to basically pressure the parents into withdrawing the kids from the school.
Oh, that's insanity,
yeah,
dude.
Absolutely crazy. So there are horror stories, but then there are stories of teachers who start to work at a charter school and they're like, oh, there's someone in here that observes my teaching consistently. That never happened at my old public school.
Right.
They give me feedback consistently. I have ways, they really love you kind of brushed over a little bit the culture of respect for learning and high expectations, but they'll do things that you might think are cheesy, like name the classrooms after colleges that the kids have gone to or stuff. But because a lot of these students are from underprivileged backgrounds, they've never been in an environment like that, right?
Or an environment that even encourages that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's high expectations, high support is the idea. And to give kids that, to shape their environment in that way, charter schools kind of provide that opportunity that I think schools that have been embedded into these low income areas for a long time lose, because it almost starts to feel hopeless.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand that. I definitely think that is one avenue where charter schools are better, but I don't know if that's one of the things I don't think is locked to charter schools. I don't think that's a part of the fundamental thing of what being a charter school is.
But why is it better for it not to be in charter schools? You keep answering some of my points with this, right? It doesn't have to be a charter school.
Yeah.
Why should it not be?
I think it shouldn't be a charter school for two reasons. Two reasons off the top of my head. One, charter schools take money away from local public schools, right? So there are fiscal impacts of opening up charter schools. Tax money that could be going to the public school gets diverted and goes to the charter school instead, which means that the public school now has less resources to work with.
See, I would be okay with that argument if there weren't also studies on how charter schools that were in the same areas as the public schools or the other public schools affected performance, and they consistently find no or a small positive effect.
So you're saying that charter schools, when they open next to a public school,
Yes.
there are no effects on that. You have to link me that one.
Okay. There are multiple, but I can find it for you.
You threw in the multiple line on me. There.
Of course.
God, you bitch.
Yeah.
Okay, you'll link me that because I need to read that.
Okay.
But then, okay, another one that I think is important is talking about the needs of special education students. So kids with special needs are underrepresented in charter schools. So children with disabilities make up about 12.5% of those in traditional public schools, but only make up around 10.6% of those found in charter schools, which means that charter schools it's not necessarily that charter schools is discriminating on special needs students because they're not legally allowed to because they take public funds. They are not discriminating against them, but they're not in charter schools or benefiting the same amount. And because of that, and because of getting less resources due to this problem, the public schools having to subsidize special needs students more than charter schools have to.
This is somewhere where I agree with you.
Yeah.
Because I've seen charter schools are regulated in that they have to take people randomly from a lottery or who apply to them. Mm-hmm. But they're not regulated in how they present themselves to parents who are thinking about applying. Right. So they can put on their website that we do not have the resources to handle kids with severe disabilities.
That's
right?
terrible.
Yeah, you can. There are ways, and again, so the charter system isn't perfect. But what if I'll kind of come back with the same question that you are coming at me with?
Yeah.
Why can't we just make charter schools not do that?
Why can't we make charter schools not do that?
Why can't we just make them not do the things that might subtly discriminate?
Because I'll tell you why. I think this is what charter schools are actually about. I think this is a fundamental aspect of charter schools. I think the fundamental thing about a charter school is being less regulated by the government. I think that is one of the fundamental core principles of the charter school. But they can be regulated in some ways. If you want, we can just have a conversation about, like, this is just about schools. What regulations do we want? Okay.
What regulations do we not want?
Okay.
So we're saying that we want them to be regulated in that they can't discriminate against people based on disabilities, based on race, based on gender.
We need every school to have the resources to handle all students.
But you can't say, like, that's the same reason you can't give a constitutional right to housing.
But every public school has the capabilities to help special. They're by law, they have to have those resources. Every public school by law has to have the resources to handle special needs students. Charter schools don't have that.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant based on student population.
Oh, no.
That makes sense.
Yes.
I'm done with that.
Okay.
I think the main differentiator is the teachers' unions.
You think that's the main differentiator?
I think you're right. Like, what, or maybe not. Maybe I don't know how restricted, how regulated public schools are in terms of their curriculum. Mm-hmm. We have Common Core as an idea, right? But how much can they waver outside of that? So how do you feel about something like the Common Core?
I love it.
Why?
Because I like a standardized system where every student is given the same opportunity no matter where you are in the country. That's my dream.
But is it the same opportunity, or is it?
It's closer to.
Being locked into the same education? Like, is it opportunity, or is it removing opportunity for something different? Because
so you're saying Common Core stifles innovation because different teachers aren't able to experiment, right?
Exactly.
So I understand that mindset, but again, it comes down from my belief that the people who, are masters in education designed Common Core specifically for the purposes, or can design at least a Common Core that is tailored to the needs of the vast majority of students, with little tweaks around the edges being available for, like different crazy circumstances.
Okay.
But if different schools are teaching all their students in different ways, different things, now we're running into a real problem where people across the street from each other are getting vastly different educations.
Why is that a real problem?
Well, because then because then we have a situation where one student could be having a way worse education from another student, and the goal should be to have everyone's education to be exactly the same and good. And so
I disagree with the exactly the same part. See, I think that's the point of charter schools is that good does not need to be exactly the same.
I think it has to be,
and
because otherwise you're leaving too much room for deviation into the negative.
But okay, well, this is a very typical, I guess, liberal conservative argument. Why let the government choose rather than the parents?
We kind of do. I mean, we vote for people.
But that's a terrible argument.
I know, but what are you saying? You want every?
I'm saying there are charter schools that are specifically targeted the arts. There are charter schools that specifically target math and science. There are charter schools that have gymnasiums with all the amenities, that have sports teams. There are charter schools that don't. There are charter schools with all different kind of types of options. I read one story about a woman with a son who was super into history, and since his school really adhered to the Common Core, he was getting almost nothing to stimulate that or to feed that. And then once he went to a charter school that gave him more of that option, he was super enriched. Like, his performance was completely in line with the rest of his class. He wasn't lagging behind at all. I imagine there would be a lot of those stories.
So you want much more
school choice.
Oh my God. But you want more like specific schools.
Not necessarily. Yes. Let's say more specific schools. Not only specific schools.
Right. But you want more specific schools.
Sure. I just want more. I want more different schools. I want more school choice.
You're not concerned that it takes resources away from the public schools?
No, not given the multiple studies I've seen that say it doesn't make them worse.
I had to read that because I don't buy that at all. Because
Okay.
I know that
It's from Brookings.
I know that less funding is going to negatively impact school performance. Like, we know that.
Not really. Like, school funding very loosely correlates with school performance a lot of the time.
Really?
Yeah.
I have not found that.
That's what I have found. And I think it's worth it for like the size of gains that a lot of these schools see, and especially, I don't know, given us here in Boston, this is kind of the center of the effective charter school.
Yeah.
Given the effect on the underprivileged communities, dude. Like that's supposed to be liberals' rallying cry. The fact that liberals are on the wrong side of this is ridiculous to me.
Well, because I think that I'm not fully convinced that the money isn't better spent improving public schools rather than opening up new schools and then locking charter schools to only a subset of the student population. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced that it's better for, if you have a school district of 1,000 kids, to open up a new school, only send 100 to that school there. 900 are still trapped in a shitty school. 100 get a good school. I don't think that's a good solution.
It's only not a good solution if the alternative is 1,000 in a good school, and it's not.
What are you talking about?
You're saying 900 in a public school, 100 in a charter school.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, it's not a good solution to have the 900 stay in a shitty public school and the 100 in a good charter school. Well, it's only not a good solution if the alternative is 1,000 kids in a good public school. But that's not usually what the alternative is. The alternative is 1,000 kids in a shitty public school. Because the additional funding from here does not make this school a good public school for the 1,000 students.
So you're saying that only those 100 that get into the charter school. So you're saying it's 1,000 people in a shit public school going to, 1,000 people in a shit public school. You take out 100 and they go to a good charter school.
Yeah, I'm saying.
And you still have 900 shit in the, but don't you see how that's not helping the majority of students? Like, that's my concern here.
I am seeing how that's not helping the majority of students, but I think it's better to help some of the students than none of them.
But I think it would be better to do your best. I think the money could be better spent helping all the 1,000 in other ways.
Or the money could be better spent funding more charter schools.
But that can you see how it could how it's inefficient to separate that one public school into like 5 different charter schools?
Only if the money is actually improving the public school.
You're not convinced that increased funding in public schools for certain things improves outcomes?
I think it can, but I don't think
like don't you think that's more worth it then if you think it can?
No, because I actually think that the gains of the 100 kids that go to the charter school could make the overall gains higher.
When you say overall gains, I don't that's like an issue with mean versus median right there. Because if that happens, then the median student feels no effect. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
The average feels an effect. The median student feels no effect at all.
Sure.
So that just seems like you're picking winners and losers here. And especially it's only through a lottery system. Like it just seems to me like you're just picking out of a hat who gets to succeed or not.
It is a lottery system.
Right.
And it is random. But
right.
But I still think that's okay because I have seen no evidence that not making the charter school is better for the kids of the public school.
So I think our true contention here is, I think more resources going to underprivileged public schools will do more than opening up a charter school.
Yeah, I'm reading the Brookings study right now.
Okay.
Or the Brookings article with studies focusing on charter's effect on overall instructional quality often find no effects, but find positive effects much more often than harm to students on the districts.
Wait, is that on public school districts?
Yes. Good or bad for students in district schools. The inevitable harm narrative has become a rallying cry in teachers' union strikes. But it doesn't actually play out. Studies estimate that in the year after a student transfers to a charter school, anywhere from $1,500 to $3,500 fixed costs must be paid from a shrinking district budget.
Right.
But they rarely find the harm predicted on the basis of district's overall funding and costs to students.
Okay. I'm being hit with this right now, so I have to do more on this.
I mean, the nice thing is I'm showing you 2 paragraphs right now that link like 7 studies.
Yeah.
So I will send this to you. But that's the main thing. Like I get the idea of the concern, but it is so clear to me that at least in some circumstances, like in urban schools that are going to greatly represent underprivileged populations, they can be enormously helpful. And I want more of that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not convinced that the charter school reform specific to charter schools couldn't just be applied to public schools and benefit more people more faster. I'm not convinced that that's the case. I don't think we need to go down the road of changing like this fundamental idea of how we do schooling. Like I think we could make it so that it's not reliant on where you live. You know, Florida has a system like that where it's not specific to where you live in your districts, and they're still public schools. I think that's fine. If your issue is with educational restrictions
and teachers unions,
but I want to focus on educational restrictions for a second. What are your thoughts on the Department of Education?
I think it's a good mechanism to redistribute funding for schools.
But the Department of Education has a duty to ensure certain learning standards across the country. And it's because we don't want schools teaching the Bible like it's law.
Sure.
And that was something that would make me nervous about charter schools. Obviously, that's an extreme example because that would break the state.
Exactly. Church and state.
The church and state principle. So I'm not going to, that's an extreme example. But I don't think that we need more restrictions over their curriculum so that it is not going to result in a obscenely worse education from what the standard should be.
Obscenely worse. Well, I think that's somewhere where we can almost trust the market?
Because they're incentive. But okay,
Because parents are still going to choose. And parents aren't going to want to send their kids to somewhere with terrible education.
Parents aren't going to want to send their kid to a place with terrible education. I would have to look. So now, for me to combat that response, I would need to understand which charter schools. I would need to know, does charter school performance, is that a predictive aspect of charter schools closing? I need to know if a charter school being successful actually is correlated with if it stays open or not.
Okay.
And when I say successful, I mean student success.
Sure. Why?
Because that would be my contention there. If you're saying that the market would solve for that problem, I need to know that bad charter schools won't stay on the market.
But if bad, okay, so bad charter schools, okay.
I'm not totally convinced that the turnover of charter schools is completely due to their performance.
Sure.
They could be due to a location, to a bunch of other
That's
reasons.
fair. And it's like, do parents actually choose correctly?
Right.
Okay. But isn't it still better than happening to live in a super poor district and being trapped in a bad public school?
Unless the public school system can reform and you can have non-district specific public schools.
But how much evidence do we need that they can't? How many years of declining results of like less than middle of the pack educational outcomes for the country and for these districts do you need before you're like, let's try something different? Because I think that's what happened.
I think what we need is a stronger standardization program across public schools. I think that's what's failing us. I think we have public school systems that are not teaching what they should be teaching in the right ways.
Why? What makes you think that?
Well, because their test scores are getting worse. But I think it's because we're not controlling how they're teaching the material.
But their test scores are getting worse. Maybe that's because we're giving them too rigid of a framework for which they need to learn the material. And if they had more choice or flexibility in how they were taught, then the test scores would be better. That's my point. I think you're making a conclusion that doesn't have any evidence on its being specifically the conclusion because this is your prior.
Am I totally convinced that declining test scores is specifically because of the way things are getting taught, though? I don't know if I even think that.
I don't think it is how what you think. I think you're just saying what's...
No. I don't think I think that. I don't think it's actually... I'm not totally convinced that the standardized test score results, like the declining ACT score, right?
Okay.
That was a big story this last month.
Okay.
ACT scores declined rapidly. I don't know if I'm totally convinced that that's because teachers got really worse this past year.
No, it's probably because there are too many distractions in the classroom.
Right, and I think that's the more fundamental thing about it.
Yes.
I don't know if that has to do with the public school aspect, is what I'm saying.
Or you're saying it doesn't have to do with the restrictions or the regulations on what is taught.
Right.
I think that's fair. I think, again, this is where like the culture of learning, which can be instilled in public schools just as easily as it can in charter schools. Mm-hmm. But maybe that's the whole thing. Maybe the whole culture of charter schools can only, like, it is only that because they feel entrepreneurial about it. They feel like they have the power to change how they develop kids, right?
You know what I need to find out? I wish I had this information off the top of my head. This is what I think we should. I think we should talk about this part here and then end and come back next week and talk about it again a little bit.
Okay.
I want to know who makes more money, teachers in public schools or charter schools. That's the first thing I want to know. I think it's public, but I don't know off the top of my head, so I'm not going to say that. Next, I want to know, do teachers quit more often in charter schools as compared to public? That's something else I want to know.
Quit rather than are fired.
Right. Then I want to know, then I guess I want to get some like either data if I can or anecdotal stories if that's all they have of teachers having to leave charter schools because they're not making enough.
Okay.
Because I think there is a lot of problems with private school teachers in the U.S. that don't make enough money, but are able to work in these private schools because they might not like a private school teacher in Florida or a private school teacher in New just don't make enough money to sustain themselves. If they're getting paid the same amount as a charter school, right? If that's more equal to that, I think that's a serious problem for teacher turnover rates, which I think would impact kids poorly too. So, but I don't know that. But that's what I would need to see. I think I need to see more information about that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Did you follow?
I think so. Like if teachers make less at charter schools,
Yeah,
than they do at public school, other public schools. Then
how does that impact the teachers' lives? Does it make them quit more? Does it make them less motivated? Does it bring in worse teachers? I want to know that. Like, is a salary increase better at bringing in better talent? Does a higher salary bring in better talent?
Okay.
I would think yes,
Of course.
but what do you think?
I think that the salary increase is one thing to think about, but I also think if I were a teacher, I would feel more incentivized and excited about my job if I wasn't teaching to a Common Core, if I felt like my performance could affect my salary, even if my salary is lower right now.
I do agree that performance should affect your bonus or something for sure.
Yeah.
I definitely think that.
Yeah.
No, I definitely think that. I think that would be a good change.
And the nice thing about this story or the anecdote of like having someone observe your teaching is that a performance bonus or a salary based on performance doesn't just have to be based on test scores, right? Someone can observe how you do your job and then give you a performance incentive, give you a raise or a bonus based on what they observe rather than just the numbers that pump out. Because I do think the idea of just teaching to the test is something that is a criticism that's been levied against charter schools a lot of the time.
Yeah. I don't know if I don't agree with that criticism.
No?
To be honest. Like I don't mind the idea of teaching for a test because they're learning it. And the test is designed to teach them the right things. I'm not totally convinced that teaching for the test is like a very, very bad thing.
I don't like the idea of teaching to a test because I'm a person who was able to teach myself to a test extremely well.
Right.
And didn't learn because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Seems like a good place to end.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.